U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in China for a three-day visit amid growing tensions between the two countries. Blinken landed in Shanghai, where he's meeting with senior Chinese officials and will then head to Beijing. It's the top U.S. diplomat's second visit to China in less than a year. Blinken is expected to discuss a number of issues, including China's support for Russia. The U.S. says China is helping Russia's war effort in Ukraine, adding that it damages U.S. security.
How to put limits on a relationship without limits? On his four-day mission to Beijing, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will hope to put some distance between Russia and China. Pushing back on China's role in Russia's war machine will be a priority.
China continues to provide materials to support Russia's defense industrial base. And all of this is fueling Putin's war machine as he attacks Ukrainians and threatens European security.
Relations between the world's top two global rivals have been tense since early last year, after a Chinese spy balloon flew across U.S. territory and fresh disputes relating to self-ruled Taiwan. Since then, they have thawed a little. Xi Jinping held face-to-face talks with U.S. President Joe Biden in San Francisco last November. But the U.S. has kept pressure on Beijing, sanctioning Chinese firms that ship products to Russia and unveiling new microchip export restrictions. The U.S. State Department says China is supporting Russia's war machine by supplying machine tools, computer chips, optics, drones, and cruise missile technology. Russia's semiconductor imports from China jumped from $200 million in 2021 to over $500 million in 2022. As the war drags on, Russia's growing economic and diplomatic isolation has made it increasingly reliant on China, its former rival for leadership of the communist bloc during the Cold War. China appears to hold the upper hand in the relationship. Washington warns it will hold Beijing responsible if Moscow makes gains in Ukraine. China shrugs off criticism, insisting it's a neutral party.
China has always controlled the export of dual-use items in accordance with laws and regulations. Relevant countries should not smear and attack what are normal state-to-state relations between China and Russia.
Tensions ratcheted up again last week after Joe Biden called for higher tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum. Blinken has his work cut out for him.
The U.S. Congress has passed a bill to ban the social media platform TikTok unless its Chinese owner sells off its U.S. assets. Lawmakers have been concerned about possible Chinese government control of TikTok. ByteDance, which owns TikTok, has denied that it shares sensitive user data with the Chinese government. TikTok has about 170 million users in the U.S. Well, for more on this, let's cross over now to journalist Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing. Fabian, Blinken's visit comes at a particularly tense time between China and the U.S. What are the main issues that the two countries need to discuss most urgently right now?
Yeah, the list is really very long. So from the Chinese perspective, the priority message is that it does not tolerate any interference in what Beijing perceives as the red lines or the core national interests, and those span from Taiwan over to Xinjiang and Hong Kong. So China wants to make clear that it doesn't want the U.S. to interfere in those issues, and also it wants to, of course, get rid of the tax sanctions and the export controls that the U.S. has imposed on China. According to head of state Xi Jinping, those are imposed to contain the economic rise of China. And thirdly, also China is wanting to get rid of U.S. influence basically in the South China Sea. So it says that it interferes with China's relations and ASEAN countries, so the Southeast Asian sphere. And from the U.S. side, I would say the clearly most urgent topic is the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine. The accusations that the US government has against China, they're pretty concrete and pretty massive. So it says that 70% of Russia's imports of machine tools come from China, and those imports are very crucial when it comes to building up Putin's ballistic arsenal. And that is, of course, a strong accusation. And it also says that, the economic relation, the trade relation between the two countries is unfair. So Blinken will also talk about industrial policy of China and the resulting overcapacities, which have become an increasing problem for the US.
Well, as you point out, Fabian, Washington keeps saying that it's deeply concerned about Chinese military support for Russia. But how much pressure can the U.S. exert on China on this issue, Fabian?
Yeah, that's really a crucial question, and you know how difficult it is. China didn't seem very willing to make any compromises. A lot of European leaders have tried again and again. Recently, the German Chancellor was here in Beijing and tried to convince Xi Jinping to, use its influence over Russia to end this war, and there were no significant results. But I think the US has potent tools to have leverage. So according to a report by the Wall Street Journal, the US government is drafting sanctions against several Chinese banks. And, this would give a lot of leverage for the US side, because this is really a very potent tool to punish the Chinese economy. And whether that works or not, I'm quite skeptical, but I think it is definitely a very strong signal by Washington.
As you know, the U.S. is threatening to ban or force the sale of the Chinese platform TikTok, which has 170 million users in America. How does China view the prospect of TikTok being banned or sold in the U.S., Fabian?
Yeah, so TikTok is really a very special company. It's one of the few companies of China that has gone truly global and very successfully so. And of course, it holds a strategic position for China. It has a lot of data that it amasses, but also it can be used if Beijing wants to influence public opinion. So it is, of course, a national security issue for the US side. But actually, the chance that Beijing would allow TikTok to get sold to an US competitor is almost zero. Every expert that I talked to told me that Beijing will not allow to do so because of the strategic importance of TikTok, which is really very important for Beijing.
Fabian, thank you very much. That was journalist Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Lars Halter from DW Business. So, Lars, how likely is it that ByteDance will actually sell TikTok?
Well, it's not very likely at all, Terry. It's actually almost impossible, and that's for several reasons. First of all, they have given ByteDance 9 months to divest, which could technically be extended to 12 months, according to language here in the law. But that is not enough time for a deal of that magnitude. Also, talking about magnitude, nobody knows how to value the U.S. portion of TikTok, but if it would likely be in the tens of billions of dollars. So there's just not too many companies who could even buy that company if it was even available like that. It would probably be coming down to Meta and Google, and those would probably also be out for antitrust reasons. And then there's also a third thing. The law clearly states that they have to divest it in a way so there would be no connection at all between the US portion of TikTok and ByteDance. And that per se is impossible, because even the US portion of TikTok would still rely on that ByteDance algorithm. That's the whole idea behind TikTok. The algorithm is what makes a social media platform like this work, and that can simply just not be separated.
So selling TikTok doesn't really sound like a viable option for ByteDance. That leaves the other option, which is what? For it to be banned in the U.S., and how's that supposed to happen?
That's what it looks like. It looks like it's pretty much a ban with a 12-month lead-in period. Now, the government could not really make people delete their apps, obviously, but they could ban it from app stores. So once it is banned, you could not download it. No new users could come in. There could also not be any updates. But also very interesting that companies in the U.S. could no longer give web hosting services to ByteDance and to TikTok, and that means they would probably run out of space at some point for their clips and videos and then just die a slow death.
I mean, a lot of people used TikTok, like 170 million users or something in the U.S. What are those users saying about this?
Yes, they're not very happy. Now, I got to say, half of Americans, approximately, just according to a recent study, are behind that ban, and they want it banned. But that's obviously for these political reasons. They've heard the story long enough now, over the last couple of years, at least 3 or 4 years now, that the Chinese are spying on us using TikTok. So, of course, you want it banned. But, yeah, like you said, 170 million users. Many of them are making money on TikTok, so they are, of course, against it, and they're speaking up. And interestingly enough, there's also the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They say, and I want to read that quote to you, if the U.S. government would ban TikTok, it sets an alarming global precedent for excessive government control over social media platforms. And they say, if the U.S. bans a foreign-owned platform, that will invite copycat measures by other countries. And that obviously is what we're already seeing, because China has just banned Meta and Meta's WhatsApp and Threads from its own platforms over there.
The EU, talking about other areas looking at bans, the EU is also trying to figure out what to do with TikTok. They also see it as problematic, we'll say. What's the latest there?
That's an interesting thing, because we have a totally different story here, not related to spying in this particular case, but we're talking about this week, especially in Brussels. We're talking about a new version of TikTok, TikTok Lite, that's been launched recently in France and in Spain. And it has an interesting option. It rewards users for watching videos. The more videos you watch, the more points you can get, and those points you can actually even exchange for money to be used online, unlike Amazon, which of course is highly addictive. And so they see a major problem. They have now, the EU Commission has just now asked TikTok or ByteDance for a risk assessment report that was delivered just last night. But whatever that says, obviously doesn't solve the problem. So this discussion is ongoing.
Lars, thank you so much. Lars Harter from DW Business.
Welcome.